The Tunguska phenomenon, the mystery of the explosion that shook the Earth. For more than a century, the Tunguska phenomenon has been shrouded in mystery. One of the great catastrophes of recent history, probably caused by a meteorite or a comet, left deep traces, visible even today. On June 30th, 1908, shortly after 7 a.m., a gigantic fireball lit up the sky over the valley of the Podkamennaia Tunguska River in the Siberian taiga. Then the ground began to shake, and huge waves began to emerge from the river, while the wind shook the natives' huts as if there had been an earthquake. To give us a better idea of the scale of the disaster, the Tunguska explosion is believed to have been 185 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. The tsarist government was immediately interested in presenting the catastrophe as if it were a divine warning, a heavenly punishment in response to the revolutionary momentum that was beginning to grow in the country. Of course, the Tunguska phenomenon had nothing to do with the proletarian revolution. Any event, no matter how big it is always used in favor of the ruling class. Years later, in 1921, during Lenin's government, Russian mineralogist Leonid Kulik ended up leading the first expedition to investigate the Tunguska phenomenon and what exactly happened in the Far East. The second expedition to investigate the Tunguska phenomenon. But rugged terrain hampered the investigation, and Kulik's team had to turn back before reaching the blast site. In 1927, another expedition was launched, again under the command of Kulik. This time, the members of the expedition managed to reach the affected area, to the place where the huts and trees had been laid to the ground. The few trees that were left standing were bare of branches and looked like telegraph poles. Overwhelmed by a supernatural terror, the locals believed that what happened was a divine punishment, a curse from heaven that destroyed their houses, felled their trees to the ground, and killed their animals. Indeed, hundreds of reindeer had been killed. Although no traces or evidence of the impact crater have been found, it has been speculated that a meteorite was, in fact, behind the Tunguska phenomenon. In the absence of other evidence, Kulik restated his hypothesis, pointing out that the Tunguska meteorite never hit Earth. Dead reindeer, river waves, and uprooted trees were the effect of the impact on the atmosphere, a powerful explosion that devastated the area. However, for the people who lived through the disaster, everything remained shrouded in mystery. Therefore, because they had no valid explanation at hand, imagination began to fill in the gaps in the story. For many years, the Tunguska phenomenon and its associated explosion were attributed to a flying saucer crashing to Earth. The alien ship version was considered until recently. The Polish-born SF writer Stanislaw Lem contributed greatly to this. One of his books, The Astronauts, begins with the Tunguska disaster after a spacecraft reaches Earth at the end of a flight that began in the constellation of the Whale, makes several increasingly tight orbits around our planet, and crashes into Tunguska. But in the early 1990s, the unknowns began to dissipate. A team of Russian physicists explained that the Tunguska phenomenon was, in fact, a meteorite, as Kulik also pointed out in his time. If there was nothing left of the meteorite, it was because it was destroyed by the energy released upon entering the atmosphere. Because when an object enters the atmosphere at high speed, it heats up so much that it starts releasing electrons. Thus, the loss of electrons generates a potential difference that unleashes energy in the form of an electric shock. That's why no remains were found. No impact crater, nothing. The meteorite was destroyed in the explosion it itself caused. But even with these clarifications, we can still consider ourselves in danger because, as we know, probability means nothing more than a degree of certainty that an event will or will not occur. Because if it happened once, it can happen a second time. Scientists estimate that meteorites like the one that hit the Podkamennaia Tunguska area could hit Earth once every few centuries. Other theories. The phenomenon that happened at Tunguska was also treated by the late Romanian researcher Dan Apostel in Dio Candida Enigmae, a book that was published with great success at the time of its release in 1984. Without giving a verdict, Apostel supported the idea of an extraterrestrial ship which would have been out of control for technical reasons. An interesting theory was also issued by the specialists of the Institute of Earth Physics of the Academy of Sciences of the former USSR, who did a series of researches in the Krasnoyarsk region between 1974 and 1978. Soviet researchers issued the snowflake hypothesis, and according to this theory, a body similar to a comet, with a core made of ice crystals, was responsible for the disaster caused by the Tunguska phenomenon. The celestial body would have moved at supersonic speed, accompanied by an atmospheric shock wave. Such a body, claimed the Soviet specialists, could have caused visible traces on the ground, but without any explosion taking place. In the absence of solid evidence, the statements of specialists from the Earth Physics Institute remained only at the hypothesis stage.